Wonderful. So, thanks for the intro. Again, my name is Les Hazlewood. I was the co-founder and CTO of Stormpath. We did API-first strategy for identity management, and we brought forth an API-first strategy to the market. And Okta acquired us earlier this year. So what I'm going to talk about today is specifically around process management as a CTO or as an engineering organization. And how many people here have not heard of Scrum before? Just out of curiosity, raise your hands if you've not heard of Scrum. How many people have not heard of Kanban? Some folks. Okay, so just a real quick recap on Scrum and some of the concepts that Scrum talks about so we can compare with Kanban. Scrum is based on schedule management for producing product. So there's stories that represent features or user behavior, and that is they're codified into sprints or iterations to complete these stories. And you use points to assign a complexity metric or level with a particular story that can help you evaluate its complexity. And then you want to plan that within the getting that work done within the context of a sprint. And then at the end of the sprint, there's this thing called a retrospective that allows you to look at what went right, what went wrong, clear the board, and start off for the next sprint. In sprint, they have roles. There is a product owner, the person or people who are trying to build something. The team members, the ones that are actually going to build it. There's a scrum master, a person who has the responsibility of making sure the process goes along smoothly. And then the teams are composed, or rather, exist of cross-functional teams. So you have people of many different disciplines in a single team trying to work towards a common goal. And then there's a board, right? A board represents the work. It's a visual representation of the work that you need to accomplish. There's a backlog, which starts the work. It goes through a set of workflow states. And then you finally get to some done state, whatever that means for your organization. And then again, there's a retrospective where you clear and reset the board for the next iteration. So why am I talking about this? So Stormpath in 2013, we had extremely limited resources. We were a startup in Silicon Valley, working super hard trying to get our product out. We had to work with extreme speed. We were at that time still working towards product market fit. We hadn't achieved it yet. And everything that was coming in was just a mix of change management soup, right? All these changes are coming in, new priorities are coming in, were we going to pivot or were we not going to pivot? All of these things that we had to deal with on a daily basis. And as that occurred, we amassed, as I'm sure everyone does, a certain amount of technical debt. So we had to manage technical debt as well. For us, though, we found that at least the way we were doing Scrum and the iterations that we had tried and the permutations of Scrum we had tried, given the schedules and the change that we were undergoing, it wasn't really good enough for us. We were frustrated, there were some complexities, and granted, Scrum might be perfectly ideal in some environments, but safe to say it just wasn't right for us. So we wanted to find out if there was an alternative. So what are some of the problems that we had to deal with? So Scrum for us, we had a half-day planning meeting, right? Start at the beginning of every sprint, and half the company was involved trying to plan what was going to occur over the next couple of weeks. The amount of product management preparation that had to go into that our product team had to deal with before the meeting started was fairly significant because they all had to get the stuff done on the same day. Unrelated teams in the middle of in the middle of a sprint planning meeting were just sitting idle. They weren't doing anything while one team was talking about estimates. And so you had people just sitting around, which as a CTO and founder was incredibly unnerving. There was plenty of priority scope debates. You know, one team would start looking at an issue and then they'd go down these rabbit holes of, well, it's going to do this, well, then maybe we should build it this way. And they'd sort of get internal debates on how this stuff should be built. You're not supposed to do that, but as humans, we inevitably want to dig into that stuff. And there was a lot of tangential derailment inside those meetings, so that was frustrating. And then everything sort of hinged on this notion of estimation. How much could we do within a given sprint? For us, that was 2 weeks. Some people have 3 weeks or more. But estimation was really, really difficult. So I want to talk about the myth of estimation, or at least as I've seen it in this company as well as many other companies I've been a part of. You guys might have seen this. This is Software Engineering Institute's software product triangle, product process management triangle. And this triangle basically represents things that can be fixed and altered while a project cycle is going on. And the theory is any two of these points on the triangle can be fixed, which means only the third can be mutable. So if you fix any two, you have to be able to move the three. And it's impossible to fix all three simultaneously and still have a quality product. So in this example, in a startup especially, cost is fixed, right? It's basically the salary of your employees. Scope might be fixed as well, basically what you commit to in the course of an iteration or a sprint, which means if those two are fixed, you can't fix time, right? Time has to be malleable. It's impossible to keep all three static without impacting quality. And so if cost is fixed for a startup, and for most startups it is, and scope might be fixed because you've committed to something at the beginning of a sprint, time has to be malleable. And if you're trying to estimate correctly to get things done on time, this is going to cause a lot of issues. So people in sprints often underestimated what they were going to accomplish. They were overestimating, but I can promise you we were all bad at estimating. No matter how much we tried and the efforts that we put in, especially given all the other things we had to accomplish as a startup, we were just not good at estimating. So that was a major issue. Different engineers have different experience levels. So you might get a junior engineer, senior engineer, they might evaluate or estimate things differently. That is not deterministic. That causes problems. So we would try to overload the sprint sometimes to try to get some things in there and working. And then we would start jury-rigging scope. You know, oh, well, maybe if we change the scope here or reduce some of it over here, we can meet our timeline. Change imparted additional planning meetings. So the things that we didn't talk about up front, you know, caused more meetings during the sprint, and more meetings caused difficulties and frustration. And then we started trying to change all this stuff to adhere to what was essentially an artificial definition of a sprint. You know, we had defined these 2-week boundaries, and well, we got to change this and that, let's get it in the boundary. That was kind of artificial, just for the sake of Scrum. It wasn't actually moving our business forward. It wasn't giving us product velocity. And so we had to focus on change management. So uncertainty definitely is a change, especially in a startup environment where, you know, you might have one direction on a Monday and then you get a major customer call on a Thursday and all of a sudden you've got to change priorities. That happens and it's real. And so change is very frequent. Changes do incur more sprint planning meetings, but you want to still try to limit work in progress during a sprint. You don't want a lot of churn with your engineers. But what happens when bugs occur or a new feature request comes in? Or you have that crazy customer call who's going to give you $1 million if you build feature X, right? You guys have been there, right? These are really hard to manage when you've already committed to a sphere of work and you have a massive amount of change as a startup. And so that led to morale and burnout for us. So flawed estimates inherently result in unreal expectations, right? You might say, oh, it's going to take me 3 days to do this. In reality, when you get under the covers, it's going to take, you find out it might take you three weeks or 2 weeks. So that's an unreal expectation. Unreal expectations, if you can't satisfy them at the end of your sprint, it results in missed commitments, right? That doesn't help your morale at all. People get really frustrated. And there's, you know, engineers have a lot of thick skin and they can deal with a lot of, but if it happens over and over again, this starts to really wear down on you as an engineer. You feel like you're not meeting your commitments. Maybe you don't feel like you're contributing to the team. And retrospectives at the end of the sprint started feeling more like critiques of our failures than they were being used as an opportunity to improve our process. It was just a knee-jerk human reaction. It's behavioral. At the end of a sprint, when you're tired and exhausted and you maybe miss some things, to start pointing fingers. You know, there's bad estimation or the priorities were changing. You know, business would say, oh, engineering, you're missing the goals, you're missing the targets that you set forth. And then engineering would come back and say, no, business, you're moving the targets. You know, you're changing things based on these customer phone calls. We can't adhere or meet our sprint commitments. And so this ended up in resulting in what I guess I call a Sawtooth Productivity. At the beginning of the sprint, you're so burnt out from the last sprint that you're not putting in the time, you're tired, you want to go home early, you just feel worn down. And then slowly over the sprint, you start picking up some speed and velocity and oh shoot, you forgot your commitments or this estimate was wrong and you've got to put in extra hours and you've got to work 12, 14 hours the last 3 days of the sprint in order to make your commitments. And so then you're putting in all these hours at the end. And then the next sprint, it starts all over again. Right? This is not ideal. You prefer highly consistent, highly productive teams throughout their work week. This is what we saw. This was, I'm sure, very common in startup life, but this was not good. It wasn't healthy. So we said, is there another approach? Can we do something different other than Scrum, perhaps? And we found Kanban after doing some researching on the web. There's hundreds of thousands of results for this on Google these days. And it's another way to look at and address process in an engineering organization. So what's a Kanban? I don't know if anybody here has been to Ueno Park in Japan. It's beautiful, but every year they have hanami, which are flower viewing festivals for the cherry blossoms. And the park can only hold so many people. And so when you enter into the park, they give you this token, or a ticket, if you want to call it. It's actually called a Kanban. And you grab this Kanban and it lets you in the park. Well, when the park staff runs out of those tickets, it means the park is at capacity. It can't take anymore, so you got to wait outside the gate until someone leaves. And then they'll give the Kanban back to the gate agent, and then the next person can come in. Right? So this ticketing system is built specifically to address capacity limits. And so Toyota in the 1980s came up with their just-in-time engineering process that is flow-based, and it's also based on constraints and restrictions and capacity. So given a certain capacity, given restrictions, how do we do things just in time? Changes come in, how do we deal with them in a quick and effective manner? So Kanban has been modified by a guy named David Anderson. David Anderson looked at the Toyota process, and then he sort of codified things or represented things in the context of software. So in the context of software, what is Kanban? It's based on continuous flow. Right? I'm starting work over here, and I've got to go through a set of phases, kind of just like Scrum, but I want to get it flowing. I want to get the whole team flowing. I want issues across cross-functional teams flowing and moving across the board all the time. It's a pull model. So when you're free or you're available, you can pull a ticket, a Kanban, a story, whatever you want to call it, into your particular workflow item and our workflow column and keep working. So it's a pull model. And if there's nothing available for you to pull, then you have downtime, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then, like Scrum and other agile processes, it also has a board. If there's anything that I talk about this afternoon that I hope you guys remember, it's really this slide. In our estimate, at least my estimate, Scrum mostly, not always, but mostly focuses or centers around timelines and estimates. Right? I've got 2 weeks, I'm going to do things, let's estimate the work and get it done in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. Kanban instead doesn't focus on estimates, which are erroneous. Kanban instead focuses on real constraints, things that actually impact your engineering process, and your process builds around these constraints or tries to address the constraints. So this is what a Kanban board might look like. And in this case, we've got some columns where progress goes from to do all the way to deploy. Every company should modify or create their own Kanban board as they see fit. This is not a prescriptive representation, but usually it's organized in a set of workflow steps, followed by a set of what they call swim lanes that a lot of times represent priority. They don't have to represent priority, but a lot of companies use these rows as priority. So the column represents a set in the overall flow. The swim lane represents priority. And this really interesting thing in pink here is this known as a WIP limit, a work in progress limit. And this is a artificial constraint on how many things are allowed to be in that particular column. And that's really, really important because this is a reflection of the constraints that you have in real life. Let's say you have 5 engineers and you can't get anything moving in that column beyond 5 tickets, right? That's a good thing. It reflects the way your company is structured, the way your engineering team is structured. And the beautiful thing about work in progress limits is, remember I said it's a flow model, and what if I can't pull something in a flow? Well, that means that engineer or that swim lane is blocked. You can't pull anything into it because maybe the WIP limits have already been reached. And when that occurs, an engineer might have downtime, right? They're not working on something on the board. And that is great because it allows you to take that time and invest in technical debt. So Kanban has a way of directly addressing technical debt that can build up for years and years and years and hurt you many, many years later. So there's a way, and you can configure this however you wish. You know, some people want to spend 10% of their time on technical debt, 5%, 20%. The process definition is up to you, but the point is Kanban has a means or a mechanism that you can use to build in these periods of time to go fix your broken software. So Kanban process is interesting. There's no estimation. everything's always as fast as possible. It's a flow model. Let's get this stuff done as fast as possible. There are no deadlines. There's flow acceleration. Things that are further down the board have higher priority than things earlier in the board. And there's a focus on finishing. You want to get that stuff off the board. Anything that's on the right-hand side of the board close to done or finished, you want to focus on that first, get it out. So there's a constant pressure, or at least psychological pressure, on getting things off the board. And you want to avoid context switching. That causes confusion for engineers. I just talked about work in progress for slack time. It affords you the ability to go fix things that aren't really represented on the business board. And this, in turn, reduces business churn because the engineering team gets to define the process after the open column. And all the business has to focus on is just what goes into the open column. And they can move that around all they want. But the second that stuff gets in the flow, business needs to back off and let it be accomplished. There's no deadline. There's no deadline. It's really hard for people to wrap their head around. But velocity, especially at a startup, is way more important than internal deadlines. Unless you have a major customer-facing time issue. But flow and velocity on building your product and getting product market fit is more important. And bottlenecks are also very easily identifiable. If you get a bunch of things in a particular column and you can't move them forward because of the work in progress limit, you can visually immediately tell if your process is slow and maybe you need to go address that particular issue. We saw in Kanban when we implemented it after a couple weeks of trying it out and training, a much happier team because there's way more ownership. They get to define the process, right? The engineering team figures out what the flow steps are and what done really means and how does it impact deployments to production. There's reduced context switching because they were able to focus on one thing and get it out before they started focusing on the next thing. There wasn't as much switching back and forth. And that reduced burnout. They weren't as stressed on a daily basis because they had direct control and influence over the process that they followed every day that they came to work. And it simplified project management too. We didn't need to focus on this notion of a Scrum Master and dealing with process around Kanban. The board was a system of truth and business input into the open column, and that was good enough for us. Here's a really interesting, unexpected benefit from Kanban that we did not see with Scrum. Quality. The quality of our software went way up. And the reason why is because there wasn't this artificial deadline to stick our features into. We weren't skipping the parts of the quality process that we needed, right? Code reviews happen no matter what, right? A lot of times when you're forced for a deadline and, oh shoot, I got to finish this issue in 2 days, you might completely ignore code peer review, right? That might go out the window. Maybe you might completely eliminate code coverage metrics that maybe are important to your team. Quality suffers the most when you have to meet a deadline. So because we didn't have deadlines and we had a continuous flow, quality went way up in our product. Our entire code base for the whole web product, our whole API, was at 95% code coverage. And that allowed us later on to completely swap out huge chunks of our entire architecture and replace it with new stuff with no concerns whatsoever that it would impact somebody in production. The quality was outstanding because of Kanban. And so the deadline pressure was alleviated. Sprint planning, gone. We didn't have to spend any time. No more times in meetings, no half a day for the whole team, gone. Project management was minimal. We just focused on the open column as product owners. Estimation poker, gone. Didn't have to worry about it. Scrum Master, gone. We don't need that resource or that overhead. All we need to focus on was board management. Every single day, the board told us the truth, and we need to make sure that it represented the truth. It was the canonical view of the health of our engineering process. We still had daily stand-ups. That was really, really important. 15 minutes every morning, all of our engineers came together. We talked about things that they were being blocked by. How can we alleviate them? And regular collaboration is key. If you're going to do these things, you have to talk to each other all the time. So, Kaizen is another interesting term in the concept of Kanban, and that is all about continuous improvement. Kaizen in Japanese means continuous improvement. And that was a really interesting mental shift for our team because instead of a retrospective that looks behind you, Kaizen, I know it's almost superficial, but it's more about looking in front of you, right? And it's just your point of view and your mindset. And as simple as that is, it has a massive impact on engineering health and morale. So it was always scheduled every certain number of weeks. We did it every 2. And we would focus on quality. What needed to change? How could we improve velocity? How do we reduce overhead? it was way more of a positive discussion than, dang it, these guys screwed up and it caused me to do this and I had to stay late that one day. It was not negative, it was way more positive. And I know it's a small shift, but it was beneficial. And so retrospectives in our case were previously a lot more defensive. In Kaizen, everything is fair game. If an engineer or engineers have a problem with something, they need a voice. And so the answer should be, as a CTO, and it was hard for me to do this at times, but let's just try it out and see what happens. We're going to try it out. If there's enough people that want to try it out. And 2 weeks later, you evaluate, is this working? And if not, then you stop doing it. But this is hugely beneficial. It gives your team a voice. Let them decide what's best for their process. As a CTO, a lot of times you're no longer programming or dealing with the low-level stuff. You're dealing with business discussions, interaction with customers, and you don't see some of the problems and the difficulties that they see on a daily basis. Trust your team, hire well, and let them decide what's best for their process. And based on this, contributions and collaborations definitely went up. People had a bigger voice. You do want to elicit feedback from people that are less vocal, though. So just people's personalities are different. You might have people on the team that don't speak up much at all. And so it's important to reach out to those individuals and call them out by name and say, John, is there a problem? Does this make sense to you? Or Susan, what do you think about this? And let them have a voice. It's really important for your team's collaboration and for their overall health. I'll just wrap up quickly. Kanban isn't perfect. Nothing's perfect. It's got some issues. The software tools that when we started using this stuff were fairly nascent. There was Atlassian and they had Greenhopper. Greenhopper didn't allow us to do various things. For example, we wanted to enforce individual work in progress limits per swim lane. We couldn't do that. In fact, I'm not sure we can still do that to this day. So software tools can be limiting, but they're getting better. And there was an overall loss, just psychologically, of a systematic focus on urgency, right? With Scrum, you have concrete deadlines. You're working hard to hit that deadline. There's no deadlines in Kanban, so that urgency went away, at least initially. And we really had to focus on it from a culture and a hiring perspective. We dealt with it through management and trying to get people to work, maybe put in some extra hours. We'd provide food and for them so that they wouldn't have to worry about, are they going to miss dinner? So we tried to deal with this from a management level, not a technical or process level. And it worked out well for us. The other second biggest thing I want to kind of impart before I leave is Kanban works everywhere. This is not just an engineering process. One of the best surprises that we had was our marketing team saw how Kanban was working for us, and they tried to do it for their marketing related work and deadlines. Our customer success team that needed to communicate things to our customers whenever ops would deploy something, they wanted to be involved in the process. So we set up a Kanban board just for ops and customer success together, so that they could communicate and get things through the flow. It worked everywhere. We started using Kanban for everything, for just general operations work, for marketing work, for content delivery. It was incredible at how beneficial it was because it's mostly asynchronous, right? You can work on stuff asynchronously and just get things through the flow. Here are 2 really good Kanban resources that I recommend if you're curious. The first one is a fantastic book. It's probably one of the 3 books that I have on my desk. This is one of them. It's called The Phoenix Project, a novel about IT, DevOps, and helping your business win. Some amazing insight here, and to boot, it's just a great read. Even if you don't care about the material in it, it's a good story, it's fun. And I swear, every one of you that have been in business or tried to build engineering, you're going to read the first 3 chapters and you're going to be like, I swear this is a book about my life. I swear. So it's a great book. And finally, the canonical or authoritative book on Kanban for software engineering is written by David Anderson. It's called Kanban, Successful Evolutionary Change for Technology Business. So highly recommend those. Here's my contact info if you need to contact me. Thanks for your time. I'm sure my time's up. So if you're feel free, I'll be at the Okta booth and we could talk about anything thereafter. Thanks.